Okay, so what I'm going to start off with here is the water base map that I had in the previous water tutorial. Um, as you can see, the edges are a bit fuzzy at the moment, so if you have a look at just this region here, the selection doesn't quite work as well as it could do. This should be a little tighter to the line work of the flagstones. It's basically because I had a really light line here, and the selection tool picked up that as the edge rather than the darker line, which is the vertical strip here. So I'm starting off with a big hard round brush, and what I'm doing is just editing directly the selection layer here. So as you see here, as I draw along the edge, that just starts filling in those regions. I can select a smaller, tighter brush to just darken up where that is there. Okay, so that tidies up my selection a little bit. If you're a bit cleaner with your line work, like I normally am, then the selection tool should more or less pick up most of that accurately to start off with. Okay, what I'm going to be doing in this tutorial is just showing you how to colour in these flagstones quickly. So, we've got our watercolour section here, so if I turn that on and off, you can see that colours that area. And now I'm going to move to the flagstones. So first things first, I'm going to take the mask from before, I'm going to add that mask to selection. So this now picks up the selection here. I'm going to set up a mask on the flagstone area, and I'm going to put Command I to invert that. Okay, so that means that now everything I'm going to draw in this folder here is only going to affect these regions here. So this keeps your water and your flagstones, your land and your sea, totally separate. And that's a technique which is used pretty much in every map I do. It's key to be able to build up those kind of selections to work on. Okay, so first off, we're going to make our flagstones nice and grey. Now, you can see this nice big grungy brush I've got. I'll put a link in the comments as to where you can find a brush like that or how you can make one yourself. So if I just show you what that looks like, if I just draw with that, it's got this kind of, it's got kind of pressure sensitive opacity. So as I press harder, it gets darker and also bigger. But we don't want them to be black, we want them to be grey, so let's pick up a couple of nice greys. We're going to put a little bit of colour into them. We're going to be kind of a grey-brown. So that's the front colour, and then I'm going to pick another colour which is very similar. So I'm just duplicating the same colour as before. And I'm going to just darken it down a bit and maybe a bit yellower. And then in my brush settings, I'm going to make it scattered, but not that scattered, so bring that down, multiply the count up a bit. Basically what I'm trying to do here is just create a much more random brush. Then I'm going to set the color dynamics and have it mix 100% between the foreground and the background, and then just jitter all of the hue, saturation, and brightness. So that's going to give us quite a varied color. Again, if I was using a background texture, like a parchment texture or something like that, this would be less important because you'd be picking up a lot of detail and kind of texture from that. But in this case, I've got to build all the texture from scratch. So having a nice grungy brush and having a lot of scatter is going to help with that. So, right, you can see that as I press down with this, I'm getting quite a varied tone. Then I'm going to increase the size, I'm going to go over it again, so that basically gives us randomness at a different scale on top. The opacity of the brush is fairly low because I've got it set to pressure sensitive, so this means that as I build up layers, adding layers and layers of kind of scattered texture on top of each other. And I'm just going to go over the edges of where the wooden section is going to be because I'm going to colour that later. And this gives it kind of a nice uniform texture. Okay, so as you can see, that's now given us quite a textured base for our flagstones. For the wood, I'm not so fussed about the multiple colours. I'm not really going to focus too much on the wood here, but I want to get some kind of brown tone laid in so I kind of know where I'm going with that in future. Right, so let's just do that there, and it gets that more or less out of the way. Okay, so that's the base colour layer. And that's just set to normal. So you can see there's no blend modes here. It's 100% opacity. It's just set to being what it is. Right, now, on the next layer, I'm going to start adding some shade. So this is set to overlay. I know some people don't like using overlay layers for textures, but I quite do. It basically keeps the saturation of the shadows quite high, which is nice for maps. If you want to do something realistic, then you want to make sure your shadows become a bit less saturated. I'm going to use a really dark blue for my shading on that. That helps to kind of blue shift the colours a little bit in the shadows, which is quite a nice effect. I'm going to use quite a bright yellow for my highlights. Again, the colour shift between shadow and highlights just helps to pull things out of it. Okay, so we have let's start off with shadows. Okay, so this is, I better reset that. I don't want it to be scattered at the moment. So what I'm doing is just reselecting the brush. That brings it back to its original preset. So rather than having this kind of wide scatter, this now is back to the brush you saw before. Okay, and there you can see what the effect is. So I'm going to press very lightly, and that's going to just start helping to bring in some shadows along the edges here. I might just knock the opacity down to that 40% because that means I can press a bit harder and still get the same effect, so I have to be too careful. And rather than putting in all the shadows at once, you want to build them up slowly, because otherwise you're going to basically see the brush edges outlined hard. I don't really want you to be able to see what the brush looked like. I just want to get the sense of a generic grungy, broken up stone edge on here, which is what the brush helps us get to, but we don't want to make it look kind of really obvious. And then bring the brush down to a smaller size and press harder to start filling in the detailed cracks right here. Follow some of the line work up into the edge of the flagstones. Let's see this some. What you want to do here is, if you've got this kind of nice line work around the edges, you want to kind of support that. So go close to any edges or imperfections that you've sketched in. A lot of the lines that you get here are imperfect because you were working quickly and you didn't really concentrate too much on exactly what you were doing. So you kind of work with those happy accidents and try and build more detail out of them. This is why it's quite nice to sketch quickly, because it doesn't really matter what you end up doing. It all kind of builds towards this kind of grungy sense at the end. You don't have to worry too much about, is that a crack there? Is that a crack there? You just add in some variation, and then that just helps the eye pick up where it thinks there should be cracks. Okay, now let's just bang in some of the detail on this wood whilst we're at it. So as before, we're just doing nice dark shadows between the boards, and then just laying in some variation on top. Okay, that still looks pretty basic, but we're starting to get there. Okay, now we want to switch over, so press X to reverse the colours. And I'll start with wood, because I kind of fancy just putting in some detail on those planks to start off with. Okay, so I'm picking up the edges, because the edges are where you have the sharpest corner, and that means that the light's going to reflect off that. So if light's bouncing off at a number of angles, because the edges are rounded, there's going to be an edge somewhere on there which is reflecting the light directly towards you. So you're going to pick up your brightest highlights, usually on the edges. So you want to run highlights along the edge of your line work. If you do that, that'll start to just make it look a bit more believable. And just put some highlights along the edges of those nail beds, because again, the wood's going to be quite sharply edged there. Okay, so you kind of see how that's coming in like that, and then we're going to do the same with our flagstones. So I'll start off with a nice big brush to kind of bring in the edges there. So the reason I'm working over the edges in this case is because you want to kind of give the sense that the flagstone is flat with sharp edges at the sides, and putting highlights closer to the edges helps with that. Helps kind of flatten it out. If you brighten up the center but you don't brighten up the edges, then it's going to make the flagstone look like it's rounded. So you want to brighten up right up to the edge of your shadow, and that'll flatten off the flagstones a bit. Stop making it look like you're walking along cobblestones. And then when you've got the kind of the basic highlights in, again, just bring your brush down, press a bit harder, and then you can put in kind of your detailed highlights along the edges here. Okay, so much of this technique is the same as we use in all different maps. So, I'd use an overlay layer to put in the lights and shades on my mountains. I'd use an overlay layer to do the rooftops on houses. If you want to just kind of build in some shading, I find the overlay layer works pretty well because it preserves all of the color underneath. You don't really end up, as long as you're kind of using white and black for your overlay colors, and then it preserves the underlying colors. It keeps the saturation pretty strong, and if you have an underlying texture, it doesn't defeat that either. It just kind of builds on top of it. So it kind of adds tone, a tonal range without really messing around with your colors or your texture, which is pretty nice. If you want to have a bit more of a look at the exact, or precisely what different blend modes do, there's a nice little just chart that I made for myself and put up on the blog. So if you have a look through there, you'll find, I think it's under blend modes. If you have a search, you'll find that chart there. Okay, so this way you see the flagstones are more or less in place. You've got some nice kind of grungy edge highlights and the bit of wood sticking out into the water. And it looks like kind of any wharf or quay or anything like that. I'm probably going to put in just one more bit, which is now I'm just adding in some kind of bulk highlights along the edge here. So because we added a bit of shadow to the water, what I'm doing here is just lightening up the edge of the ground. Mostly just because what I want to get the sense of is that kind of this area here is higher than this area here. So what I'm doing is brightening up this edge, just pull it out of the screen towards you, and this got darkened down a bit to kind of push it into the background a little. But that's all. That's the flagstones.